The market of illegal drugs and what is the most efficient intervention.
The consumption of drugs is not only harmful to oneself, but it also creates high costs for society. Therefore, governments have tried to reduce the amount of drugs that are consumed for decades using police, secret services, the military, and federal law enforcement agencies. This conflict is widely known under the term war on drugs. But until today, no victory has been claimed and is still not in sight. In the following few minutes, we will give a broad overview about the market of illegal drugs, the possible governmental interventions to reduce the quantity of drugs exchanged, and our personal statement on what intervention we consider the most efficient.
Because the consumption of drugs creates external and internal costs, governments have made drugs illegal products. But making a product illegal does not eliminate the market for it. The market of illegal drugs is a black market dedicated to the cultivation, manufacture, distribution, and sale of drugs that are subject to drug prohibition laws. The market for illegal drugs is a highly complex market, since it is characterized by aspects such as addiction. Asymmetric information, meaning that consumers cannot verify a product's quality prior to the purchase, and intermingling of supply and demand.
To get a better understanding of the market of illegal drugs, we should look at the graphical representation. The supply and demand model provides us with a basic economic framework, though we should keep in mind that this model depends on an ideal market that is characterized by aspects such as perfect information and a homogeneous community. Let us first take a look at the demand curve. It slopes downward. That means at higher prices, users purchase a lower quantity of the drug in question. Also, the demand for drugs depends on the market price of drugs that is affected by the government intervention. If the price increases, consumers respond in two ways. They either cut back in consumption or they drop out of the market. And now let us take a look at the elasticity of demand. Taking into consideration the aspect of addiction, one might say that demand is inelastic or unresponsive to prices. The change in quantity will stay little when the price increases. However, the price elasticity varies greatly across different types of drugs. Now let's continue with the supply curve. The supply curve slopes upward. That means at higher prices, suppliers are willing to provide more drugs to the market. If the prices increases, suppliers respond in two ways. Current suppliers expand the size of their drug dealing business, or new entrants will enter the market and will provide new resources. Now let's continue with the elasticity of supply. The elasticity of supply is rather elastic because the drug market often has, at least to some extent, a monopolistic characteristic.
Externality. The consumption of drugs creates external and internal costs, thus private costs differ from social costs. Therefore, the market of illegal drugs is the case of a negative externality and suggests government intervention. The government tries to optimize the social outcome.
What are the options for the government to increase the social optimum and therewith reducing the quantity of drugs exchanged in the market? Generally, we have two primary efforts to reduce the quantity exchanged: supply-side interventions or supply reduction efforts. This means trafficking prevention, law enforcement that targets suppliers, increased border interdictions, and more intensive police actions against street dealers. On the other side, we have demand-side interventions or demand reduction efforts. This means consumption prevention, great availability of treatments, penalties on users, and heavier advertising against drug use.
Let's talk about the supply-side intervention. The supply curve shifts to the left, thus it increases the equilibrium price and decreases the equilibrium quantity. Equilibrium price rises by a higher percentage than equilibrium quantity falls. Distance between S1 and S2 might be interpreted as the increase in unit production and distribution costs, which is T. It compensates for the extra risks and costs created by the policy intervention. And how much the curve shifts depends on the effectiveness of the intervention and the supplier's ability to respond to those efforts. The amount the government spends on this intervention is equal to T times Q2. The drug market revenue increases because changes in price exceeds changes in quantity. In this case, the effort of the reduction of the quantity exchange of drugs is only little. It increases the revenue of drug dealers to high costs of society. Therefore, these interventions are very ineffective.
Demand-side interventions. Generally, it has to be said that the demand-side interventions are more complicated to put in action. The demand curve shifts to the left. Thus, the equilibrium price declines by a lower percentage than equilibrium quantity falls. Therefore, it reduces the quantity exchanged. The distance between D1 and D2 may be interpreted as the decrease in unit production and distribution cost equal T. The amount the government spends on this intervention equals to T times Q2. Therefore, the associated crime should drop as well. The drug market revenues decreases. In comparison to a shift in supply, we can generally not say whether the quantity exchanged is greater or lesser for the same shift, but shifting the demand for an inelastic elasticity of demand seems to be more efficient.
Let's talk about the advantages of legalization. Because of the great increase in price, the output can be reduced more than in a war on drugs. It reduces the drug-related crime related to rival suppliers in the market. The products the retail stores sell must meet government-certified standards, and therefore they replace products of bad quality. Law enforcement can spend the money that is earned from the tax for the facing of other crimes. Alcohol can be seen as a substitute of drugs. Therefore, a higher consumption of drugs would decrease consumption of alcohol.
Disadvantages. New consumers would arise because they want to experience a drug. Some of them might get addicted, which creates a higher cost for society. New black markets could appear because of the high tax. Because supply-side interventions on inelastic demand are insufficient and demand-side interventions are complicated to put into action, we recommend the legalization of drugs, also based on the advantages that overwhelm the side effects of black markets.